and welcome to American Catholic History, brought to you by the support of listeners like you. If you like our podcast, be sure to rate us 5 stars and give us a great review wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Noelle Heaster-Crowe.
And I'm Tom Crow.
Today we're talking about a site of grace and miracles, Holy Hill in Wisconsin, and the Shrine of Our Lady, Help of Christians. It's kind of remarkable that this place is not better known among American Catholics, considering its history and what has happened there.
Yeah, you're not kidding. A legend of a long ago consecration to Mary. A mysterious hermit with a shady history who shows up, experiences a miraculous healing, and then, one day, disappears. And then, over the years, many more miraculous healings, and now it is the home of a major Marian shrine.
Sounds like a great site to visit on another American Catholic history pilgrimage, with Milwaukee being so close.
Plus, Our Lady of Champion, not too far away, and the Shrine of Our Lady of Guadalupe in La Crosse, and a bunch of other great Catholic sites just all around the state. Yes, indeed, we must pull off that pilgrimage next October when the leaves are in their full fall glory.
Plus, of course, beer, brats, and cheese curds.
Cheese curds.
Yes, when in Rome is one of our pilgrimage principles. Experience the holy sites as well as the native culture. In Kentucky, that means bourbon. In Wisconsin, it means beer, brats, and cheese.
Right. And now we're both hungry and looking forward to the pilgrimage. We better get on with this episode.
Yes, let's talk about Holy Hill.
Holy Hill, Batman.
First, the topography and the sort of hill we're talking about. The hill itself is something of an anomaly in this part of Wisconsin.
Yes, the land is generally flat. It rolls a bit, but it's more or less flat. The land was covered by glaciers, and they scraped it all flat. But as the glaciers melted, thinner places in the glaciers became holes. So melting water ran along and fell through these holes. The rivers that were on top of the glaciers carried along sediments that had been dug up, and the sediment fell through the hole with the water and piled up into conical mounds below, where these holes allowed the melting water to drop to the ground. These conical formations are known today as kames, or spelled K-A-M-E, a kame.
A number of these kames rise from the land throughout the area of Kettle Moraine, stretching diagonally across southeast Wisconsin. The particular kame in question here is one of the highest points in all of southeast Wisconsin. Its peak stands about 300 feet above the surrounding ground and about 1,350 feet above sea level. Now, something like that rising from a flat landscape would grab the eye all by itself, but then crown it with a massive twin-spire church and, well, we'll get to that in a bit.
Yeah, so that's the place. Now the story of how this place of miracles happened here. The legend of its beginning goes back to 1673 and the French Jesuit missionary priest Jacques Marquette. When he was based in Green Bay, Marquette and Louis Joliet made an expedition to the Mississippi River for exploration and evangelization. On the return trip, Marquette spotted this solitary cone hill sticking up off in the distance. He climbed the hill and at its summit erected a rudimentary stone altar and a cross. He offered Mass and dedicated the hill and surrounding land to Our Lady. Then he returned to Green Bay, never to return to that hill.
Now let's fast forward about 200 years to the 1860s. A Frenchman named Francois Subaru arrives at this hill suffering from a partial paralysis of the legs. He takes up residence as a hermit. Area farmers notice that he's hanging around, and while at first they are suspicious, after a while they befriend him and begin to support him to a degree. They help him build a cabin and provide for some of his basic needs. One farmer eventually got his story out of him.
Subaru said that he was a seminarian in France, but he fell in love with a girl. So he left seminary and left the country, very reasonable, going to Quebec to test both his vocation and his love for this girl. When he returned to France, however, he found that he was still in love with the girl, but she had not waited for him. In a lover's rage, he killed her and fled. Yeah, probably not priest material. He returned to Quebec, where he lived a life of disgrace, safe from being punished for his crime, but not without the guilt and knowledge that he had sinned gravely.
He found solace in reading the papers in the library of the university in Quebec, as he worked for a professor. In one of the papers, a deteriorating sheet from the diary of Marquette, he found the missionary's account of ascending that solitary cone-shaped hill in the Wisconsin wilderness. And he became determined to find that hill, restore the altar, and erect a new cross for the honor of Mary and the glory of God. This he regarded as his life's penance.
So in the early 1860s, off he set from Quebec to find the hill Marquette had dedicated to Mary. But when he arrived in Chicago, an illness struck him which left him partially paralyzed. Undaunted, he made it to the hill and ascended to the summit, crawling up the last portion of the rocky ascent as his legs were only barely working. He spent the night in prayer to Mary. When he arose the next morning, his paralysis was gone.
In thanksgiving for the healing, he built a rude altar on that spot and erected a cross. He found a cave at the base of the hill that he deepened and made livable. He slept there and spent hours every day in prayer at the summit. Eventually, he erected 14 crosses along the path he had worn up the hillside to be the Stations of the Cross.
Once the local farmers had spread the story amongst themselves, it wasn't long before the broader community knew of the hermit of the hill and his miraculous cure. Others began coming to the hill to ascend to the little outdoor chapel at its summit and pray for healings of their own ailments. And then, after 7 years, Soubrio was gone. He simply wasn't to be found in the cabin the men had built for him or anywhere else on the holy hill, though some reported seeing him here and there from time to time.
Now, we should note that the first portion of this story isn't entirely accurate. According to the diaries and very careful notes that Marquette and Joliet kept, it is impossible for Marquette to have been on this hill in 1673. There is evidence from the stories told by Native Americans in that region that black robes, or Jesuits, did come to the area, and some did plant a cross on top of the hill and pray there. But it wasn't Marquette. So the elements of Soubrio's story about his own activities hold up, and there were Jesuits who sanctified the site. It just couldn't have been Marquette.
And it seems that the Irish and the German settlers in the area heard from the natives about what the Jesuits had done on that hill. So they regarded the hill as a holy site and called it Mary's Hill as early as the 1850s, about 10 years prior to Soubrio's arrival. And then in 1863, the priest dedicating the first shrine of Mary, Help of Christians, on the hillside was the first to refer to it officially as Holy Hill when he called it that in a sermon.
And during all this time, there was still a third story about the background of this hill and how it came to be in church hands and a site of major pilgrimages. In the early 1850s, an Austrian-born priest named Francis Paul Huber was serving as pastor to local parishes when he made a prophetic statement.
Yes, he was visiting a friend who lived near the hill. As he gazed on it, Father Paul Huber said, "That beautiful hill yonder reminds me very forcibly of a hill near our home in my native country. I feel sure, and the day is not far distant, when that hill will become one of the most noted places in all this land, when it shall be consecrated and made holy, a place of worship and pilgrimage, when tens of thousands shall come to do homage to the Virgin Mary and her Son."
Quite a prophecy. But he also worked to bring it to fulfillment.
Right. In 1855, Father Paul Huber bought the land that included the hill and intended to simply sign the deed over to the church. But before he completed the transfer to the church, he had to return to Austria. So he left the deed with a notary public whom he instructed to complete the transfer. However, Father Paul Huber died in Austria, and the notary public with whom he had left the deed also died. So there was no official record of that instruction being given. So while there were plenty of people who knew of Father Paul Huber's intentions, the deed was in legal limbo for a while. What ensued was a 21-year series of purchases, mistaken titles, quitclaim deeds, and other quitclaim deeds before the land finally became the property of the church in 1876.
So, to recap, the Jesuits did come and offer Mass on the hill, but not Father Marquette. The Indians remembered the black robes and told the earliest European settlers, the Irish, who began to regard the hill as a sacred place. They told the German settlers who came later, who also regarded the hill as sacred. Father Paul Huber bought it, and it took forever to get it into the church's hands. A hermit with a sketchy history shows up and reports a miraculous healing, and that seemed to be the spark that really made the place take off as a site of pilgrimage and devotion.
Awesome. And the pilgrims did start to come. Many of them came on crutches or with ailments of the eyes or ears, some with cancer, and many other ailments. By the time the first log church was dedicated in 1863, there already was a collection of crutches and leg braces left behind in testimony to answered prayers.
One nearby public house owner named Matthias Werner was interviewed by the Chicago Tribune in 1889 about the reported cures and what he had witnessed.
It's actually funny how the reporter characterized this guy. He wrote, "He is himself a zealous, though not a bigoted Catholic, and a man of excellent repute among his neighbors."
I presume they mean his respectable, non-Catholic neighbors.
Well, of course, yes.
At any rate, the non-bigoted Werner shared a number of stories with the reporter, including a man who regained use of his long, paralyzed legs, a 5-year-old child who had never yet taken a step, but then suddenly did while on the hill, a man with a life-threatening cancer on his face who experienced a complete healing, a young woman who was nearly blind from ophthalmia and experienced a complete cure, and a man who had badly damaged his eyes in a gun accident and who was experiencing horrible pain, and he was totally cured. And there were more.
Yeah. In 1893, the Waukesha Freeman newspaper published an account of another miracle, a woman who had a horribly painful varicose sore on the side of her foot just below her ankle. She visited Holy Hill, spent much time in prayer, and experienced severe pain for a while, and then the pain subsided. And when she descended the hill and removed her bandages, the sore was gone, and with it, the pain.
But potential healings aren't the only reason to go to Holy Hill.
No, not by a long shot. First, there are the sacraments. And second, the incredibly peaceful and beautiful atmosphere. There are tremendous testimonies of the great sense of peace and stillness and beauty that pervades the land around and on the hill.
Right. The Mass and many devotionals have been a feature since the earliest days. The first chapel was completed and dedicated in 1863. It was a 16 by 16 log structure, very simple. It had a cross on top, was plastered and painted inside, and the log exterior was decorated over the years by the many people who carved their names in the logs of its walls as a sign of devotion. Local priests would take turns offering Mass there.
This log church was near, but not at, the peak of the hill. For a number of years before the hill was fully and finally owned by the church, the government used the peak for surveying and lookout purposes.
Once the church owned it, however, it didn't take long for the priests involved to suggest a much larger, more permanent church, and to put it right on the summit of the hill.
This effort to begin a new church began in 1879. A road had been graded to allow horses to pull loads up the hill. The peak of the hill was leveled and lowered about 20 feet to make a sufficiently large pad for the foundation. Bricks were made by clay found nearby, and the first church rose from its foundation. This church was 76 feet long by 46 feet wide, with the sacristy added on and an apse for the sanctuary. A gold cross glistened above the steeple, 68 feet above the ground.
And this new church served well for years. Bells were added in a new separate bell tower, better outdoor stations with the cross were erected, a grotto of Lourdes built, and ever more additions.
Of the experience of being in the presence of that holy space and seeing this church in its place, one visitor wrote, quote, "As I viewed it from the valley upon one of its unapproachable sides, a feeling of veneration akin to awe crept over me. Upon a cone-shaped peak, almost circular in form, and thickly covered to its base with rocks and tough timber, stood the church. As a landmark to guide and an emblem of faith, it is strikingly beautiful and prominently alone. Its gold cross glistens in the bright summer sun and trembles like the stricken deer in the rude winter wind. All through the long day and deep into the dark night, like a sentinel to guard the weird mysteries, it keeps the lonely watch. And when the shadows of evening spread their misty mantle of dew, it towers there still, in its isolated solitude."
In the 1890s, the Archbishop of Milwaukee decided to put the shrine in the care of a religious order so that it could be properly maintained and the many pilgrims who came would find the ministrations they needed. At first, he thought of offering it to the Franciscans, but ultimately offered it to the discalced Carmelites since they had a more Marian charism. So in 1906, the first 6 discalced Carmelites arrived. Within the next few years, they built their first friary and expanded the number of Carmelites who lived and ministered at Holy Hill.
It was also around this time, 1903, that Pope Leo XIII declared Holy Hill a shrine and made it a site of holy pilgrimage, with a plenary indulgence available for the faithful.
And that means that the faithful who visit the site in a prayerful disposition, recite certain prayers, and who go to confession and receive communion worthily can obtain a complete remission of temporal punishment for sin. We'll put a link to what a plenary indulgence is in our show notes for those looking for more.
In 1925, the Carmelites took on the task of building a new, much larger shrine church. The final Mass offered in the second church was on September 8th, 1925, the Feast of the Nativity of Mary. Then that church was raised. The hilltop was lowered another 20 feet to make the pad large enough for this third church. The cornerstone was laid on August 22, 1926, and it took 3 years before the first Mass was held in the lower level. 2 more years were necessary to complete the great upper church, and was blessed and consecrated in July of 1931.
That structure is still there. It is a marvelous church. It is Romanesque with the round arches. Perched high on its hill, it floats on a sea of trees. The twin spires rise high above the foundation, capped with crosses. The interior has marble and mosaic and everything you'd expect in a truly beautiful Romanesque church. And after a renovation and restoration in 2006, it is gorgeous.
The centerpiece of the Mary Help of Christians Shrine Chapel, which is attached to the right side of the nave of the basilica, is a statue of Our Lady presenting Christ to the world. This statue, which is a life-size depiction of Mary and Jesus, was made in Munich and brought to the U.S. for the Philadelphia World's Fair in 1876. It was purchased for the shrine by a devout Wisconsin businessman. And in 1878, now this is back when the log chapel was still up there, it was carried up the hillside by 18 young barefoot women wearing white robes and blue ribbons. They were escorted by about 100 men on horseback and a large procession of priests, religious, and faithful from all over. The devotion of the people who came before us can be mind-boggling at times.
Today, in addition to a regular Mass and confession schedule, the Carmelites offer retreats and welcome pilgrimage groups from all over. About 500,000 souls visit Holy Hill annually. But as mentioned above, the church, its gorgeous windows, marble altars, plus the sacraments offered there, and of course the miraculous healings, aren't the only reason to visit Holy Hill.
No, the 400-plus acres which the Carmelites own and maintain around the hill are a wonderful respite all their own. There is a grotto, large carved stations of the cross, walking paths, and just lots of space to sit and be with God in nature. One writer, describing the sense of being there, and this was back when the second church was still present, wrote, quote, "After the first frosts of an autumn foreboding has changed the color of the leaves, the scene beggars description. The foliage then assumes the brightest attire ever donned by nature, and every twig is radiant in its holiday garb. A level acre is not within the radius of the eye, and every peak and indenture has some tree or bush thrown in relief by a contrast of gaiety. All the varied hues indigenous to this lovely spot greet the eye with delight and endless confusion. The knobs are resplendent with beams from hardwood leaves, while the slopes sink meltingly subdued until they are indefinably lost in the deep red of the sumac that fringes the bottom." He later continued his thought, "The church is a conspicuous object to all the neighboring country. Its elevated position enables the residents within a radius of 10 miles to point the stranger with pride to the Church of Miracles. The swain who treads the furrow in the wake of his plow, and the maid who chirps her song at milking time, both pause in their task to look at this beacon of hope."
And that is what the basilica and its surrounding lands remain, a beacon of hope. About 30 miles from Milwaukee, high on a hill in a rural part of Wisconsin, secluded from the world and surrounded by hundreds of acres of God's glory, the Basilica of the Shrine of Our Lady, Help of Christians, still welcomes pilgrims, those seeking cures, those seeking solace, and spiritual healing. And if you join us on our pilgrimage to Wisconsin, you will be able to experience this historic and sacred site for yourself. This has been American Catholic History. If you enjoy American Catholic History, please become a supporter. Get information on how to become a supporter at americancatholichistory.org/support.
Also on our website, sign up for our newsletter, learn more about Holy Hill, see about our pilgrimages, and find other great stories from American Catholic history.
We also love the great reviews our listeners leave. Those and the 5-star ratings help others find us. You can email us feedback, questions, tips for episode topics, or other comments at feedback@americancatholichistory.org. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/American Catholic History, on Instagram at ACH_podcast, and follow us on X at ACH1513. I'm Noelle Heaster-Crow.
And I'm Tom Crow.
Thanks for listening to American Catholic History, brought to you by the support of listeners like you.